Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Grimgor, Ironhide, and how to survive against them as the Chaos Dwarfs, or rather how to avoid them in the early game. Because there's nothing quite as bad as playing your early game, dealing with all the issues you have in your campaign, and then this guy shows up with several full stacks against you and wipes you out. This is a particular problem for poor Zaytan, who has a pretty rough campaign in a lot of ways, at least at the start, because you want to expand east as Zaytan into Cafe, but you also have Grimgor at your backside. But it is very possible, if you're playing any Chaos Dwarf campaign, to at least avoid Grimgor for a period of time. Now, bear in mind that avoiding him early game doesn't mean you won't have to deal with him late game, and letting Grimgor gain power isn't necessarily the best decision in the world, because if you think he's strong early game, wait until he conquers the entirety of the Mountains of Morn and then comes for you. That's where the real fun begins. It is dealing with an endgame crisis from turn 1. That is how things are in a Chaos Dwarf campaign at the moment. But let me explain how these things work. Grimgor starts here over in the Eagle Eyries. He will take Gorge Rock on turn 1. You should know it. You should be aware of it. He wipes out the Ogres. He takes Gorge Rock. He'll do this on every difficulty. I think maybe if you set the difficulty to easy, he won't do it turn 1. But even then, I would probably expect him to gain control over this province. Now, he only has one starting enemy, the Ogres that control Carrick Vrag. Now, on any decent difficulty, he'll take this in about a dozen turns, 10 turns or so. Maybe faster, maybe slower. If you're playing on a low difficulty, he'll do it a bit slower. But if you're playing on a high difficulty, don't be surprised if he's taking it in like 8 turns or something like that. Or maybe even faster than that particular timetable. But once he's done brutalizing the Ogres, he's going to pick another victim for his rage. And that victim might be you, if you have vision with him. See, the AI bases its decision-making on the campaign based on a number of factors. One of those factors is, of course, the innate aggressiveness of the Legendary Lord and of the race of that Legendary Lord. There are some factions that are passive, some factions that are incredibly aggressive. The Greenskins are one of the most aggressive races on the campaign map. In fact, I think they are the most aggressive race on the entire campaign map, and Grimgor is one of the most aggressive lords on the campaign map too. This benefits him a lot on the high difficulty. If you're playing a Greenskin Legendary Lord, that's the playstyle you want to adopt. So the AI is actually doing a really smart thing by being incredibly aggressive. It does backfire for Azag, for Warzag, for Skarsenik, because their aggressiveness bites them in the ass. They overcommit to a war and then they lose their core territory when other factions sneak up and wipe them out. This happens to Warzag, who gets wiped out by Quake or Malagor if he overcommits in trying to take down Forgrim. But Grimgor has no major natural rivals that can stop him early on in a campaign, exception of Kolic. Now, Kolic can defeat Grimgor when we're talking about AI wars, legendary AI Kolic versus AI Grimgor. Kolic can win that fight, or Grimgor just wipes the floor with him. Though Grimgor is not likely to wipe him out so easily because the challenge zone is an absolute nightmare to take for anyone, the AI or the player. But if it ends up in a war between Kolic and Grimgor, you've bought yourself some time. Most of the time, however, that may not happen. If you're hoping that the big, lazy, dumb lizard over here is going to do your fighting for you against Grimgor, be prepared to be disappointed in like 9 cases out of 10 in virtually every campaign difficulty that there is, maybe even on Legendary. The AI also decides who it's going to declare war on based on its rank. So Grimgor becomes one of the strongest factions in the game very quickly. That's because he can recruit a lot of units very quickly, and he takes a lot of territory and entire province of 4 regions very quickly, and he ends up having a lot of armies. Like, he's got 3 full stacks over here. He hasn't even declared the war. Wait until he declares a war. That's when the fun times begin with Grimgor. You're looking at 6 full stacks at turn 10, for instance, or turn 12 in this particular case. Ends up pretty damn insane. And he's recruiting a 4th stack already. He has the money to do so, by the way. Maybe not from his capital, not just yet. Or rather, he just took his capital and the game hasn't updated that just yet. But beyond aggressiveness and strength, like the AI will always attack weaker factions than itself, or most of the time it will attack weaker factions than itself. If you see a weaker AI faction declaring war on a much stronger faction, it's kind of like some last-minute desperate effort because they know they're going to be wiped out. That's, by the way, why you may see a lot of factions that you have vision on declaring war on you, even though they're down to their last territory and they're about to be wiped out, because they know they're going to lose. Grimgor is not going to lose so easily, but because he's so strong versus everyone else, including you, crucially you, he's likely to declare war against you. The reason you're so vulnerable compared to him is the AI knows when a faction is strong, even if the strength ranking doesn't necessarily represent that correctly. Like, for instance, here, I'm strength rank number 15. So you might think, oh, I'm pretty decent. Well, Grimgor is still stronger than me, and two, more importantly than that, I don't have all the benefits that the other AI factions do, because every faction has major benefits. And the AI does calculate this in its decision making. It does calculate the benefits that factions get on a high difficulty. This is where you get the infamous AI aggression against the player on Legendary. I don't think it's necessarily so much that AI despises the player on Legendary, as much as it is that the AI is looking at the other factions and thinking, well, the player is weaker than they are. Now, of course, from a practical standpoint, that's not really the case, but from, like, economy, from armies, most of the time, it isn't going to be a case. Like, actually, I'm strength rank 24 here. I misspoke. I was strength rank 15 before losing a bunch of units, finishing off Village's army. So that did obviously cost me in this particular case. This, by the way, why taking few casualties in battle matters, because it affects your strength ranking, and based on your strength ranking relative to an AI faction, they're going to decide to attack you or not. If you're strength rank number 1, and also if you have a lot of vassals, you rarely, if ever, get declared war on me. This is on you. That's why the Warriors of Chaos, for instance, are so strong, because factions almost never declare war on them. Not necessarily because they themselves are so strong, but because also the vassals are calculated, are put in that particular equation. This is why Grimgor, for instance, will almost never declare war on Kolic, because it's not just Kolic, it's also the Dolgan added into that mix. This is why if you vassalize Grimgor as Kolic, no one's going to ever declare war on you, or it might be some desperate last-minute effort, or unless you encounter an extremely powerful faction on the campaign map, and it will have to be absolutely strong to be able to match the strength of your vassals and your own strength. I think the AI does calculate your own strength ranking and also your vassal strength ranking when it does make that particular decision. Then, of course, there is aversion. Grimgor hates you. He despises the Chaos Dwarfs. I can't imagine why, but he utterly despises the Chaos Dwarfs. Minus 100 aversion that Chaos Dwarfs have with greenskins, and obviously a bunch of other aversion that get put into question. But he does need vision to declare war on you, and also the AI does care about direct territorial land links. If you have a port settlement, that the AI has a port settlement, all bets are off. You might see factions across the world invading you via the sea, but on land, the AI does care about the direct land link. So one of the ways to reduce the likelihood of a war is not have a direct land connection to the faction that hates you or is stronger than you. This can mean anything from not taking over certain provinces, or if you do take them, just raising them. You can actually avoid quite a lot of wars throughout the game if you just raise the settlement. So for instance here, if I was say playing Astrogoth, if I wanted to avoid a war as Astrogoth against Grimgor, I could just raise Blizzard Peak to the ground. Unless I directly control it or I move an army in this particular province in the first place, I won't have vision with Grimgor. And none of the Chaos Dwarfs actually do start with vision in Grimgor. Not even Zaytan, who might think he's very close. Even Zaytan doesn't have direct vision with him because Blizzard Peak is standing in the way. Unless an ally or an army moves in this territory, you're not going to have vision. If you don't have vision, you can't engage in diplomacy. So that means that I can't declare war on you unless it actually sees you. Now, in this case, Grimgor has gained vision with me, but that's because he's taken the Titan's Notch. He declared war on the Mountain Eaters over here in the Titan's Notch, and the Titan's Notch borders the Granite Spikes. Like, the border is over here. It is a bit silly, I admit, but it is how the game works. So there's a direct land border, or very indirect either way, but a direct land border between me and Grimgor right now. So that means I might be his next victim. And because he's already finished up wiping out the initial ogres he starts a war with, and he's likely going to finish off the Mountain Eaters soon enough, he's going to declare war on me. But at least I've avoided the situation where he just finishes off his initial ogres and declares war on you instantly if you're playing as Zaytan. I'm sure this is an experience quite a few people have already had trying to play a Zaytan campaign. Or as Astrogoth, as Drazov, you start expanding, you take the Wolflands, and then you come in contact with Grimgor, who's likely going to take Firemouth. It is unavoidable that you come in contact with Grimgor. It's almost unavoidable that he declares war on you. Unless you get very, very lucky and Kolic or some other factions manage to wipe him out. That can happen, but I want to emphasize it is rare. I've seen it happen in actually one of my first Zaytan campaigns. I got extremely lucky with that one, I have to admit. Like, Grimgor losing to Kolic, it can go the other way around very, very quickly, and you're left dealing with a green brute on your own. That isn't funny. Or you don't encounter him for like 30 turns, and then he shows up with a dozen stacks against you. Then it becomes the Endgame Crisis Complete Edition. Yes, the ultimate Endgame Crisis, rather. And it becomes an absolute nightmare. But avoiding a fight early on can be advantageous. But here's the thing. This gets flipped on its head by the Castor Caravan system. Why is that? Well, Castor Caravans don't start from your capital, the Valerie in this case. They start from Zarnagrund, all of them. And so if I create the caravan, and let's say I send it over here to the Great Hall of Greases, in this case, then, or the Black Crag, well, this caravan gets spawned here. Now, Grimgor, and that means it's starting a territory right next to Grimgor. It may have vision with Grimgor here in the Eagle areas, because your caravan is going to see this particular territory, or even if it doesn't see it, it will certainly see the Black Fang territory, which Grimgor is also going to take fairly early in the campaign. He might, in fact, take the entire province by the time you can even use a caravan. So the caravans are what give Grimgor vision for the Chaos Dwarves in any Chaos Dwarf campaign. It doesn't matter if you're Drazov, if you're Astrogoth, if you're Zaytan, it is mainly the caravans, especially an early game caravan, that gives Grimgor vision against you. And because he hates you, because he has few other rivals, and because you're weaker than many other factions he might declare war on, that's the reason why he will declare war on you, especially as Zaytan. Now, of course, him moving over this territory to attack you might just piss off Kolic, who's going to notice him and just declare war on him in return, which would be the most ideal situation in your particular campaign. But don't count on it. Don't count on that particular thing. If you want to avoid this situation, just don't start a caravan early on. Now, this obviously has a bunch of downsides, but there's also benefits, believe it or not, because if you wait with getting a caravan for, say, a dozen turns, then you can go over here in the industry tree and get the Merchant Guild's Veteran Convoy Master, so you will get a caravan at rank 4. Rank 4 over here, which means that you'll be able to get more money from that. But it is going to slow down your early game, and you might not want to do that, depending on which faction you're playing. If you're playing as Drazov, you shouldn't care about this at all, because you kind of want Grimgor to declare war on you early, because he might actually waste a bunch of time trying to invade your territory if you don't move in the Wolflands yourself to confront him. Or he might just show up in the Sentinels and burn it to the ground, which is pretty annoying, I admit. But it's something to bear in mind. But not giving him vision for at least the early game can be advantageous. It can be advantageous for another reason as well. If you wait 10 turns, a dozen turns, then yeah, he's going to wipe out his initial ogre faction. But if you haven't come in contact with him in any way, shape, or form at that point, he might declare war on another faction. So over here, I've gained at least a couple of turns. Like, I've spent 12 turns not having to deal with Grimgor, and I might gain like 14, 15, maybe 20 turns before he does declare war on me. In 20 turns, I'll wipe out Miao Yang. That is an inevitability in this particular campaign. And having dealt with Miao Ying, I am more free to deal with Grimgor. I might not even have to go defend and waste the time that would require to march my armies over here. There's a bug with Fog of War if you're wondering why he's in shadow. But I might not have to march my armies from here to deal with Grimgor and the Granite Spikes. I could instead take my Miaoying, take all this territory, and invade for the Mountains of Morn, which would be a much better campaign situation to deal with than having to spend 6 turns or multiple turns taking Bloodwind Keep Village and then just spending turns wasting time and potential labor just to march my armies west to conquer the northern mountains of Morn and then return to Cathay for other reasons. That wouldn't be a great campaign situation for a lot of reasons. So avoiding an early fight to Grimgor can be very beneficial, as Zaytan in particular, but it also benefits Astrogoth, I believe, as well, because that way you don't get Grimgor invading your territory. The AI doesn't like moving for territory it doesn't control, but sometimes they will. And while the territory Astrogoth does have is fairly safe and distant enough from Grimgor that he's likely not going to invade it, if you say decide to play an Astrogoth campaign where you just conquer the north, which you can and is the easy path, then don't count on Grimgor not invading Zorno's Skull. Though, if he does, you might want to pay the cost and just conquer this territory. You might want to conquer the territory and run in a circle so that your armies end up close to Uskolak so that you can then go deal with Grimgor. There are ways around that. But yeah, not gaining vision on a faction is important, and just not sending the caravan at the earliest opportunity can buy you that critical amount of time, which might mean you have the luxury, yes, luxury when you have a neighbor in Grimgor, luxury to conquer other territory, which might make your fight easier against him. He will get stronger, but so will you. And those are some of the important things to remember. And these kind of things, the things that I mentioned in this video, do apply to every other faction and every other situation around the campaign map. Like, consider that you may not want to end up in a war with a certain faction on the campaign map. Then just don't go next to them, don't conquer territory next to them, don't gain vision with them, maybe raise some settlements to the ground, and you can avoid a war that you don't want at that point. For instance, if you're playing Grom the Paunch, you don't want to take Bordalo necessarily. You might want to raise it to ground, because if you take it, then you're coming in contact with Elfarian, who likely will declare war on you. And this applies to other factions as well. Like if you take Quenelles as Grom the Paunch, guess who's going to declare war on you? The entirety of Athaloran. Now, bear in mind that if you're expanding a certain piece of territory, a war might be inevitable, but just buying yourself a couple of turns, or a dozen turns, 20 turns, can be extremely beneficial as well in your campaign. Questine here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and I'll see you boys and girls next time. Beware the green!